There are gaps in human history, but none more shocking, controversial, and closely monitored than the 18 years that disappeared from the life of Jesus. A silence so long that even the wisest scholars, archaeologists who have dug all their lives, theologians who have turned over every ancient manuscript, have to admit, we have absolutely no idea what happened. And when history is silent for too long, we must ask, is that silence natural? Or did someone actively create it? Before we go any further, I want you to think about this. If a character can change the entire spiritual journey of humanity, if his teachings are enough to shake the most powerful empire of that time, then are the 18 mysterious years of his life really unimportant? Or was it the 18 years the world was not allowed to know? The period from 12 to 30 years of age of Jesus disappeared from all official texts. The Gospel shows us a boy arguing with the scribes in the Temple of Jerusalem, and then the doors closed when they opened again. Before humanity was no longer a child, but a man walking with strange authority, healing the sick with a touch, saying things that silenced the elders. That absolute transformation can hardly be explained by 18 years of living like a normal person. So, where did those years go? Why were hundreds of extra-biblical manuscripts that tell of a young wanderer across continents cast aside? Why do fragmentary records from Egypt, Persia, India, and all the way to the Himalayas describe a strange young teacher with a peaceful gaze and healing powers? And why is every clue that leads us to esoteric civilizations considered taboo? This is no longer a religious story. This is a historical investigation where lost documents, mutilated records, and legends buried in darkness are all beginning to speak again. And today, you will hear them. In this video, we follow the footsteps of a young man who left Nazareth at age 12 and returned to Galilee 18 years later as an awakened man. We travel through the forgotten temples of Egypt, the fiery caves of Persia, the ancient monasteries of India, and the snow-capped mountains of Tibet, where traditional teachers tell of a young traveler who carries an incomplete circle. But before we go any further, I want to ask you something, not to spark engagement, but because it's really important. If you feel like there's something wrong with that 18-year gap right now, something that you can't explain but you know isn't random, write it down in the comments, because what follows won't just tell you a story. It will make you question the whole official history thing and why sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones that get erased. If Jesus' hidden journey had a starting point, then almost all the clues point back to the same place: Egypt, a land where ancient knowledge outlasted the empires that buried it in the sand. Interestingly, the ancient texts don't describe Jesus arriving there as an ordinary student. They describe a young man with a look in his eyes that made the priests pause, as if they sensed something deeper, something older, something that made them more alert. A legend recurs in many manuscripts. The boy carried a strange symbol, an open circle with a line pointing skyward. None of the priests could explain it, but they all sensed that its bearer was no mere visitor. In Egyptian mystical tradition, an open circle was more than a symbol. It was a sign of an unfinished soul, an unfinished journey. And that made the boy the object of intense scrutiny. From the scattered stories of Memphis, Elephantine, and the desert traders themselves, one interesting detail keeps repeating. Jesus did not learn as others learned. He did not come to acquire knowledge. He came as if to awaken some memory hidden by time. The elder priest described that there were ancient incantations that he did not need to be explained, as if he had heard them somewhere in a previous life. One of the strangest descriptions recorded: "You don't learn the letters, you recognize the sounds behind the letters." For Egyptian mystics, that meant you were tapping into what they called the language before all languages. This is also the moment when many accounts describe a dramatic change in Jesus. He became extremely quiet, not the quiet of a scholar, but the silence of one who is listening to what others cannot hear. One priest even described his presence as not an empty silence, but a moving silence. The Egyptian texts also contain a doctrine that the Romans were particularly afraid of. Intention creates form, and form creates the world. It was the basis for what humanity later called magic. Healing, change, transformation, not magic, but the result of a person being able to tune into the deepest levels of consciousness. What's most surprising is this. These accounts portray Jesus as receiving these teachings not as a newcomer, but as someone recovering his memory. And when the monks realized this, they didn't teach him like a novice. They observed, they tried, they asked questions, and in every surviving account, we see they acknowledge one thing. This boy didn't just absorb, he reactivated. But the most important thing is this. The teachings that Egypt held at that time were completely unsuitable to appear in the official Gospels. Because if it were true that humans could touch the divine without temples, rituals, or intermediaries, then the entire power structure based on religion would collapse. Perhaps that is why the Egypt section, the first piece of the puzzle in 18 years, is one of the most curiously missed sections of official history. And this was only the beginning. For if Egypt awakened the memory of Jesus, it was Persia, India, and Tibet that trained that memory to transform into the power that the world would later call divinity. Leaving Egypt, Jesus did not return to Galilee as a man finished learning. Extra-biblical accounts portray him leaving the land of the Nile as a man with an unanswered question. And that question drew him farther east, where ancient civilizations held other parts of the mystery that Egypt had only just revealed. According to fragments from ancient Persia, the Magi, the keepers of the fire, saw a young man from the west who seemed strangely peaceful. They were skeptical. They tested him. They wanted to know if his peace was real or just an appearance. And these tests, though described in mythical language, had a common theme: facing oneself. There is a record of Jesus walking on hot stones, where the heat seemed to tear at a man's will. But the boy, according to Persian legend, calmly replied, "Pain is real, but it does not own me." This is not about physical strength. It is about him understanding what the Egyptians taught. Intention is stronger than feeling. Another legend has him confronting an old, mostly blind beast, living only on its wild instincts. And strangely, the beast did not charge. It slowed, then stopped. The Magi recorded that the young man did not strike the beast down. He made it realize the peace within itself. If true, this could be the first piece of the puzzle to the healing power Jesus would demonstrate years later. But the greatest test comes not from the heat or the beast. It comes from the sacred fire, a symbol of pure will. In Persia, it was believed that whoever passes through the gaze of eternal fire without fear will understand their true nature. And it is here, according to legend, that Jesus does not try to conquer the fire, but to become one with it. Some modern scholars call this detail metaphorical. But when put in the context of the entire journey, it is more like a spiritual experience, a step toward realization. Leaving Persia, his route took him to India, where traces of him appear in the late Pali records, where several monasteries tell of travelers from the West who had the power to heal by their presence alone. These stories are not found in any of the Gospels, but their repetition in so many places makes them impossible to dismiss as meaningless legends. In India, according to many ancient texts, he learned that healing is not an action, it is a state of awareness. When people look at each other with the eyes of unconditional love, healing occurs naturally, without ritual or method. This is eerily similar to the way Jesus healed people in the Gospels. No ritual, no formula, just presence. But the most pivotal place was higher, colder, and more isolated, Tibet. Here, legend has it, in the silence of the mountains, in the misty breath, and in a stillness rarely experienced by modern man, Jesus experienced what the monks call the great emptiness, a state in which everything is no longer external, but internal. One legend says that he heard the voice he had been searching for since childhood, not the voice of another, but the direct awareness that God is not in the sky, but is beating within every life. If this is true, then Tibet is not the final destination, but the place that marks the second incarnation of Jesus, not physical, but conscious. All these pieces, Persia, India, Tibet, when put together, create a story that mainstream history never wants to reopen. The story of a man who returned from the East not just with knowledge, but with a vision that could shake an empire. When Jesus returned to Galilee, the land of his birth barely recognized the young man walking the same path. 18 years earlier, he had left as a carpenter boy, gentle, ordinary, no different from the other children his age. But the man who returned bore the weight of faraway lands, of experiences the villagers had never heard of, never even imagined. Extra-biblical accounts tell of the elders looking at Jesus with a mixture of surprise and alarm. "Those eyes are Mary's," they said, "but the way you walk, it's as if you're from somewhere else." The villagers sensed something had changed, but couldn't quite put their finger on it. It was whispered that he no longer acted like a Galilean. Those who met him said that standing before Jesus felt like standing before someone who had lived a lifetime, or many lifetimes, in one trip. The strangest thing was, Jesus did not tell them where he had been. He did not speak of Egypt. He did not speak of Persia. He did not speak of India or Tibet. But the way he looked, the way he kept silent, the way he touched the poor man's shoulder, everything seemed as if he were carrying the memory of many wisdoms rolled into one. The children were the first to recognize him in a different way. They were not afraid. They ran to him, sat beside him, without him saying a word. Children often feel the real presence of a person more than adults, and they sense from him something that adults have lost: security. Meanwhile, the poor, those burdened by life, came to him simply to sit. They did not beg, did not demand, but it was Jesus' silence that made them weep, as if someone had finally seen their pain without judgment. They said he healed, but not in the way priests do. No ritual, no invocation, no rules, just presence. And this is what the religious establishment begins to worry about. Someone who can heal without a system, that is a threat. Someone who can teach about God without a temple, that is dangerous. Someone who can say that God is not a place or an organization, but an inner reality that can shake things up. Unofficial accounts describe priests whispering that Jesus' teaching did not come from any particular school of Judaism, nor was it Egyptian, Persian, or Indian. It was a synthesis of all of them, something that could not be boxed in, confined, or labeled. Some desert texts even call him a structure breaker, not because he wanted to rebel, but because he did not belong to any framework. He had seen enough to understand that truth lies not in a system, but in people themselves. And amid all these changes, one curious detail continues to appear in the legend: the incomplete circle he bore as a child. It is said that one morning on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, Jesus knelt down and drew the symbol in the sand, closing the circle for the first time. No one knows what it meant exactly, but manuscripts hidden among the Essenes say it was the moment when he fully remembered who he was. If this is true, then the return to Galilee was not the end of the journey. It was the beginning of a spiritual earthquake that would later shake the Roman Empire. Looking back at the entire journey, Egypt, Persia, India, Tibet, and then back to Galilee, one understands that what has been hidden from history for 2,000 years is not just where Jesus went. What has really been hidden is who Jesus became. One who had passed through the greatest wisdoms of the ancient world. One who had experienced silence, fire, water, ice, spiritual trials that the Roman age could not understand. One who returned not with borrowed knowledge, but with an understanding that no doctrine could encompass. And it is that freedom, freedom of spirit, freedom of connection with the sacred, that has caused these years to disappear from official history. A man who teaches that God does not belong to any temple, to any dynasty, to any system, is a man that religious authority cannot accept. Perhaps that's why those 18 years were erased, because if they were left behind, the biggest question would become too dangerous. If Jesus could find God on his own without an intermediary, what if every other human being could do the same? It's no longer a question of religion, it's a question of power. But while official history has closed the door, fragments from the margins, from the Egyptian desert to the Tibetan monastery, continue to tell the same story. Jesus did not return simply as a teacher. He returned as the one who discovered what all wisdom has sought. God is not far away. God is in everything. And the awakening belongs not to one people, but to all of humanity today. When we recount that story, a story that history once tried to bury, we are not simply reopening an ancient file. We are reaching for what people have sensed but not dared to articulate for centuries. That Jesus' journey is not a legend to be worshipped, but a roadmap for anyone who dares to seek the truth. And if you've made it this far, it means that some part of you has felt how real this story is. Felt that the 18-year silence couldn't just be a meaningless void. So I want to ask you the question that Spotlight Legends asks of those who dare to look deeper into history. Who dare to question rather than simply accept the given answers? What do you think is the most hidden part of Jesus' journey, and why? Leave your thoughts in the comments, not because of the algorithm, but because your honest answers can open up perspectives that history has tried to hide. And if you believe that Jesus' lost years are not a void, but the key to the whole story, then please like, subscribe, and share this video so that this truth is no longer buried under the dust of 2,000 years of silence.